We would like to acknowledge the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nations as the traditional owners of the land on which the university stands. We respectfully recognise elders past and present.
Welcome to Newsline, live from the RMIT studios.
Hello and welcome to Newsline. I'm Will Pasqua.
And I'm Sandra Thompson.
Today, we'll be looking at rising fare evasion on Melbourne's buses, a podcast about Indigenous designers and artists who are boycotting Spotify.
We'll also be looking at funding for mental health services in Melbourne's West. But first, today's news.
The bill to establish a treaty between the Victorian State Government and First Nations peoples was passed in the Victorian Legislative Assembly yesterday afternoon. The bill is expected to be debated in the Legislative Council in just under 2 weeks. Alongside a formalised treaty agreement, the bill establishes the First Peoples Assembly of Victoria as a permanent body with the power to consult government on issues affecting Indigenous Victorians. The Victorian Liberals have said they would scrap the treaty if elected at the upcoming state election next year.
Organisers of the weekly pro-Palestinian protest in Melbourne CBD have said the rallies would be paused as a result of the ceasefire agreed between Israel and Hamas. Weekly rallies have been held across major cities around Australia for more than 2 years. Lord Mayor Nicholas Rees has welcomed the announcement, telling the Age newspaper that it is time for Melbourne to get some relief.
Education ministers from across the country are meeting in Canberra today to discuss the implementation of the under-16s social media ban. E-Safety Commissioner Julie Inman-Grant and Federal Communications Minister Annika Wells will also be in attendance. The two are expected to introduce a package of resources for educators and parents to help them understand the new laws and explain these to children. From the beginning of December, social media platforms will be required to take reasonable steps to prevent children under the age of 16 from using their apps.
Community health organisation Co-Health has announced that it will close several clinics in Melbourne due to major funding shortfalls affecting more than 12,000 patients. Co-Health blames inaccurate Medicare rebates and a lack of government investment for the decision. Health experts warn that the cuts will push more people with complex needs to overcrowded hospital emergency departments.
The Victorian Justice and Community Safety Department has announced plans to increase late fees for fines by 73%. The state government hopes to collect an extra $40 million in revenue under the new fees. It is unclear when the changes will come into effect.
The City of Melbourne has altered its domestic cat policy. Cats were previously subject to a night curfew between 6 p.m. and 8 a.m. to protect wildlife in the city. The council has now changed this rule and will now allow cats to leave home at night, provided that they are on a leash. That's all for our headlines. Now to our first story. Melbourne's Myki ticketing system is due for an upgrade in the coming years, but the bus system is arguably where Melburnians touch off the least. Reporter Ethan Cederman looks at how Myki is affecting public transport usage.
Melbourne's public transport system is the lifeblood of our city, a vital network that keeps us moving. And since its introduction in 2008, the Myki card has been the key to the system. Many of us are familiar with the ritual, the beep of the card, the green tick, and you're on your way. But on Melbourne's buses, something's changed. A parliamentary review released last month shows touching on is down significantly. From 60 to 70% before the pandemic, to 25 to 30% after.
No one really touches on a bus, so you just get into a habit of not doing it either.
Low-key, it's public transport, but it's not public, is it? It's not free, it's not cheaper. 5 stops down the road, and I need to pay $5.60 or whatever. I mean, I've got concession, but still, that's ridiculous.
Do you always touch on?
No, never.
But government data shows that most people who don't touch on do have a ticket. they might have just already touched on the train or tram. Experts say low compliance comes down to rising travel costs, an unreliable bus network, and an outdated Myki system.
It is viewing buses as that almost little cousin of rail modes, which includes train and tram. So it's something that is quite unique to Melbourne and Victoria, where because there is the largest tram network in the world that is based here, there is an affinity to fund rail over bus. And when you compare it to any other major Australian city and even globally, buses play a much bigger role in that CBD movement of people. And that's even out of the CBD and into the suburbs as well.
While the train system continues to receive record investment, Melbourne's bus system has fallen behind, the least funded of any bus network in Australia. New Myki machines continue to appear across the network, with contactless payments arriving next year and the full system upgrade to be complete by 2028. Public Transport Victoria and the state government will be hoping that encourages more touching on, especially on our buses. Ethan Seidemann, RMIT Newsline.
Have you ever wanted to work with an Indigenous designer, but not sure where to start? A new podcast made here at RMIT is here to help you out.
The podcast is called Solid Yarns. It's a 5-part series that looks at how commercial clients and Indigenous designers can work together. Joining us is Nicola St. John, one of the people behind the project. Welcome to Newsline, Nicola. Tell us, how did this idea come about?
It's great to be here. So this podcast series really came about to, I guess, distill the process of how to work with a First Nations designer. I'm a colonial settler with English and Irish heritage, and I did find it hard to start projects working with First Nations artists and creatives about how to go about it and how to make sure I was working in culturally safe ways.
We also have a little taste of the trailer here. Let's take a look.
Have you ever wanted to work with a First Nations artist? Or are you a First Nations creative?
Respect feels like, just giving me flexibility and feeling like my artwork, my opinion based off my profession is valued.
Wondering how to break into the design or commercial art industry?
I touch on a lot of queer themes just as a way to be like, I want to make the art for me that I didn't get to see growing up.
When I started painting, I asked my grandmother, I said, can I paint this?
Solid Yarns explores what happens when First Nations creative practices meet industry projects. Find us at solidlines.agency.
The podcast looks at the issue of ICIP. Can you explain what ICIP is and why it matters?
Sure. So ICIP stands for Indigenous, Cultural and Intellectual Property. And this really stands for, I guess, all the knowledges and stories that First Nations people own based on their, I guess, traditional stories and heritages. So it includes things like dances, traditional bush foods, but in the context of design, it also incorporates things like iconography and symbolism. And I think a really kind of nice way of understanding ICIP is when you look to places like Champagne in France, who kind of have that sense of kind of ownership over that wine style. Everything else is sparkling wine, but kind of Champagne owns the name Champagne. So it's really about understanding what First Nations people in Australia and across the world really own. So what is their traditional knowledge? And how can we really protect that? So we can never, I guess, own someone else's story or someone else's symbols or someone else's icons. So it's really putting a blanket protection across that type of traditional knowledge.
And you're one of the co-founders of the design agency Solid Lines. It's an Indigenous-led design agency which you helped start. Could you tell us about why you started it and why it's important to have an Indigenous-led agency?
That's a great question. So Solid Lines came about in around 2020, and it was a 3-year co-design project of working with First Nations artists. So what we found in design and commercial art industries there was a lot of First Nations talent, but there wasn't really any, I guess, culturally safe and supportive pathways into these commercial industries. So there was a lot of talent, but they weren't kind of landing these kind of bigger commercial jobs. So we really set Solid Lines up based on First Nations priorities. They had this amazing kind of artwork, but they weren't really familiar with working in, I guess, more commercial design, advertising, architectural settings. So it was really setting up a supported agency to really, again, protect their Indigenous cultural and intellectual property, making sure their rights were protected and they were licensing their work in the right way, to make sure that they were kind of fairly compensated for their work, but also helping connect them with kind of bigger clients and bigger projects where they could really kind of showcase all their amazing talent.
Thanks for taking the time to join us today, Nicola. The Solid Yarns podcast is available wherever you get your podcasts. Just search for Solid Yarns. We're going to head to a short break now. We'll be back with international news with Ava Ross and a look at how Melbourne's punk music scene is dealing with ethical concerns over the streaming platform Spotify. Stay with us. Welcome back to Newsline. I'm Will Pasqua.
And I'm Sandra Thompson.
We're now going to turn our attention to international news with Ava Ross.
Thank you, Will. US President Donald Trump has stated that he will meet with Russian President Vladimir Putin in Hungary after an apparently very productive call on Thursday. Trump made a post on Truth Social saying that great progress was made during the phone call and that it was extremely frank and trustful. He also says that they spent a great deal of time talking about trade between Russia and the US once the war with Ukraine is over. The meeting with Putin is expected to take place within the next 2 weeks. More than 30 Christians have been arrested in China, all of those people being either pastors or church staff. The arrests took place across 7 different cities. Those arrested have reportedly either been detained or placed under house arrest. Some reports say this is linked to Chinese authorities launching raids on churches from the unregistered Zion Church network on the 9th of October. Activists have described these as some of China's largest arrests of Christians in decades. New footage captures the moment a house drifted from land in the floods following Typhoon Halong in the US state of Alaska. Last weekend, Alaska was hit by the remains of Typhoon Halong. After the typhoon crossed the Pacific Ocean, it triggered extreme winds and major flooding into the state, leaving 1 dead, 2 missing and 1,500 people displaced from their homes. Greece's parliament has passed a new labour law allowing 13-hour workdays in some cases. Under the law, annual time is capped at 150 hours and the standard 40-hour week remains in place. Unions have staged 2 strikes this month in a fight to withdraw the new bill.
Lots to unpack there, Ava. That footage of that house floating away was just quite shocking. But we'll turn to the Greek news. There was a lot of disagreement within the Greek government about the new law you've said that's being introduced. What have opposition parties said about it?
Yeah, so the opposition parties have accused the government of eroding workers' rights. So they think that in the long run, the 8-hour workday will just be abolished completely and that workers will be exploited. So they have said that Greek employees are already struggling to make ends meet, and they already work longer hours than most European while earning less.
So the government has said it's optional to do longer work days. Can you talk us through whether this will affect both the private and the public sectors?
Yeah, so it only affects the private sector, and for those in that private sector, it only applies to one job. So like I said earlier, they're struggling to make ends meet, and so most people are working 2 jobs. And with this new law, they could potentially drop their second job and just work that first job but work overtime for more. Saying so, they can only work those longer work days for 37 days each year. And workers cannot be dismissed for refusing the longer work days, but protesters don't believe this to be true.
Thanks for that, Ava. The local punk scene in Melbourne is grappling with growling calls to boycott the streaming platform Spotify. The call to boycott Spotify comes as the Swedish streaming giant has invested in the arms industry, Easy Lyrics reports.
Suddenly, streaming music is now financially entangled with military surveillance. And for Melbourne's local punk scene, it's a moral rupture.
Artists have found themselves in a situation where, like, they're basically being robbed. Like, firstly, like, to not get paid anything or just to get, like, absolute pennies from first stream has not only affected the industry, but then to find out that that money that they are taking is being invested in, like, war.
Melbourne's punk scene, which is built on community and resistance, is now rethinking how they release and promote their work.
We're used to getting sent links to artists, Instagram, Spotify's, and even in the last week, I would say I've received more Bandcamp links.
From rehearsal rooms, venue offices, and late-night chats between bands, the ethics of streaming aren't just theoretical anymore. They're shaping choices, shifting loyalties, and forcing artists to rethink how they connect with listeners. And in a scene built on community, that connection is important.
It's something that everyone's talking about. I think we're asking our friends, have you left Spotify yet?
For many artists, the Helsing investment isn't a standalone scandal. It's the latest chapter in a long story of exploitation. From fractions of a cent per stream to opaque algorithms, Spotify's model has left musicians underpaid and undervalued.
A band that can sell out the Tote is lucky to make $800 a quarter in streams.
I feel like everyone knows that they want to support artists directly and go on shows, and buying merch and vinyl is like the best way to do that.
And while the headlines focus on tech and geopolitics, the impact lands here, in the lives of artists trying to make it work. Izzy Lewis, RMIT News.
We're heading to a short break now. We'll be back with more news.
And we'll hear from one of our reporters who's been looking into mental health funding in Melbourne's West. Stay with us. Welcome back to Newsline. I'm Will Pasqua.
And I'm Sandra Thompson.
People in Melbourne's west are facing what one researcher has called significant geographic disparity in psychiatry wait times and costs, according to Medicare claims data.
While a growing number of community-based services are starting to support people outside of the Medicare system, there are calls for more action.
Lachlan Patrick has been covering this issue for the Westsider and joins us now. Lachlan, what have the Medicare claims revealed?
Thank you. Yes, I've been covering this issue for the Westsider with Natalie Heslop and Nia Barnes as well. And what we've found with these Medicare claims, we've spoken to health and economics researchers who've been able to show us these measures of supply and demand specifically for psychiatry appointments. And we have some data to show you. There it is. So we can see, look at that inner west, Hobsons Bay through to Essendon. Prices as high as $422, $425 in Essendon for a first psychiatry appointment. And then as we get further out in the west, those waiting times really stretching out beyond even 7 weeks, 53 days in Wyndham, 53 days in Hobsons Bay. Essendon also still copping it, even though it is the highest for the fees as well. And so what that's showing us is that there are these real barriers in the West to accessing psychiatry, but also that it's not felt evenly across the West.
So you've been visiting some hubs that the state government says will help the missing middle. Who are the missing middle and where have you been?
Right, that's a great question. That was a question I had as well, right? They talk about this missing middle, and it's these people who need mental health treatment, but they don't need hospital treatment. So rather than investing in the hospital system, where the state government is usually investing its health spending, instead funding partner organisations out in the community. You were reporting on CoHealth earlier. CoHealth actually runs a hub that we visited in Sunshine. I want to tell you, though, about a hub in Brimbank, where it's not focusing on the mental health patient themselves, but rather the family and the carers around them who can often be left in the shadows. Jesuit Social Services runs a mental health local Connect Centre, and I spoke to Nick Pace, the manager of the centre in Brimbank.
The idea of the program here is to provide, I guess, a safe and warm and welcoming space that people can feel recognised and understood and validated and normalised, and to really break down the stigma of being a carer. They can be really burnt out, sometimes frustrated at the system that the person that they're caring for is in. So coming here is a place for them to connect with other carers and connect with lived experience staff to be able to share those feelings in a safe way. We provide support here on site in our centre in Sunshine, but we also recognising that the West is quite a big area and people live in quite far away from Sunshine. We do outreach support as well, so our counsellors and support workers are able to travel to where people need us most. Caring for someone with a mental health or substance use issue is really distinct to caring for someone with, say, physical or cognitive disability or ability issues. It was fantastic that the Royal Commission heard those voices finally and were able to invest in this initiative to be able to provide that dedicated support just to carers.
The federal government has been grappling with a mental health worker shortage around the country. How is this issue being tackled in the West?
That's absolutely right. There was a report they found where it was about 38%. I believe that's off the top of my head. We'll check that. But 38% mental health worker shortage around Australia in 2021, estimated to grow to 42% by the end of the decade. And so when you think about these mental health worker shortages, it takes a lot of training, a lot of education. You have your undergrad, you have your honours, you have your masters, your PhD, doctorate level even. And so one of the big questions has been, well, how do you get people along that pipeline more smoothly? Now, Lifeline has moved into West Melbourne in a partnership with St Albans University. Part of the reason for that, so that the people taking the calls better represent the people making the calls, and there had been a 1/3 rise in calls to Lifeline from the West, but also having that centre on the university campus means that the students who are studying their undergraduate degrees, who are getting into honours, who normally would find it maybe a bit more difficult to find those placements, they're able to easily get into those kind of placement opportunities where it may have been more difficult in the future. So thinking about what's going to deliver returns, not right now, but maybe 5, 10 years down the track. There's a lot more to this story, and we're really looking forward to bringing it to you. Again, me, Natalie Heslop, Naya Barnes, in a future issue of The Westsider.
We're really looking forward to reading the upcoming work that you'll have. Thanks so much for taking the time to explain, Lachlan.
Brilliant.
Thank you.
A new report says that reading levels, especially among younger Australians, is on the decline. Our reporter Molly England took to the streets to find more.
When you have the world at your fingertips, who needs to read a book anymore? According to Australia Reads, we do. In a study on 19 countries' reading habits, Australia ranked 17th for their likelihood to pick up a book to read for pleasure, 5% below the global median. We spoke to Melburnians today at the State Library of Victoria about their reading habits.
In the last 12 months, how many books do you think you might have read?
Roughly about 20, maybe?
Maybe 5 or 6.
14, maybe.
In your spare time, how likely are you to pick up a book to read for pleasure?
Well, I like to read around 2 hours a day.
I'd say pretty likely.
Probably not likely.
There was a report done of 19 countries and their likelihood to pick up a book. Where do you think Australia might have ranked?
Maybe like middle ground, like number 8, maybe?
Maybe 12?
7?
It was number 17.
That's a bit embarrassing.
17th.
That's kind of like shocking.
What do you think are the factors that might contribute to Australia's low reading rates?
Books are quite expensive.
It's like phones.
Well, I know there's a lot of people in like the newer generation that like definitely like to spend more time on their phone.
And that's the end for the first part of Newsline. We'll be back with more news at 5 o'clock.
We'll have more interviews, more stories, and the latest in sports and weather. See you at 5.